For black Americans in Congress, Hr40, that's a bill, would examine the history of slavery and discriminatory government policies and suggest ways to address inequality. Consider this: the typical white household has about 10 times the accumulated wealth of the typical black household. It's an issue we began looking into last summer on the campaign trail, and we found what many scholars say is the root of this racial wealth gap. It's not entirely in slavery or some century-old wrong, but in fact in the modern suburbs, and it touches on my own family's history.
In 1953, my grandfather, Rudy DeCopel, became a homeowner, moving my grandmother and 3 kids, including my dad, out of a tiny apartment in Manhattan and into a new house in Lyndhurst, New Jersey, one of America's growing suburbs. After World War II, millions of families made a similar move.
Families are pursuing the American dream to give their children a better chance in life.
A lot of them were masons, carpenters, farmers.
Working class.
Working class.
Proudly so.
Definitely.
Bob Jangeruso is the mayor of Lyndhurst and a lifelong resident.
We had great childhood here. It's priceless.
One of the best places you could ever imagine to grow up.
And Joe Cafone, a retired police officer, is an unofficial town historian.
It sounds like a classic American suburb.
That's it. That's exactly. That's a really good way to put it.
But America's suburbs have another story, less often told, about who was able to buy these homes and benefit from that boom time economy, and who was not.
It's just a remarkable record of exclusion.
David Trout is a law professor at Rutgers University, Newark.
It is not accidental, and it is not just a question of bad attitudes. It's a question about inequitable rules.
From the 1930s to the 1960s, the major federal programs that developed the suburbs and guaranteed mortgages were for whites only, first as a matter of policy and later in practice. Redlining, for example, is a term that comes from these 1940s-era maps adopted by the Federal Housing Authority. Green, blue, and yellow areas were typically eligible for government-backed loans and investment. The red areas were not, leaving them starved for resources. And as I looked back at Lyndhurst and the surrounding county, where my great-grandparents also owned a home, I noticed those redlined areas had a lot in common.
They were anywhere from 45% to 95% Negro, the term used. Some had wells spoiled by typhoid. Some did not have city gas or utilities going to all the properties. Some were divided off by a railroad line or an elevated train, so physical segregation in addition to everything else. Any of that surprise you?
Not at all. In fact, you can multiply those findings across the country. Those who were fortunate enough to enjoy the largesse of this government were able to see benefits accrue over generations, which they could then share with their children and their grandchildren. And so to be left out of that process of household wealth accumulation has been devastating for black families.
By 1950, about half the new home purchases in America were made with government-backed loans. But 98% of them went to white buyers. And among veterans like my grandfather in the lucrative New York, New Jersey area, it was more than 99%. It's an uncomfortable fact that families like mine are only just beginning to face.
Wait a minute, you're telling me they were only going to mortgage white people?
Yeah.
For you to say that Lyndhurst is the way it is, because it almost implies that Lyndhurst was racist.
No, this is my family too. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that we had no idea.
You're right. Most people would not have known that the federal government had this program in place.
A lot of people did not know.
But a lot of people, Lee Porter among them, were personally, physically aware that racist policies prevented black families from moving into highly desired neighborhoods.
I didn't call it redlining, but yeah, that's what it was.
What did you call it?
We call it, this is the area that persons of color can live.
At 94 years old, Porter still runs the Fair Housing Council of Bergen County.
You've been called the mother of fair housing in New Jersey.
I don't know how that happened.
She's been here since the 1960s, when she and her husband were blocked from buying homes they could afford.
How did you feel when you found out that real estate agents were steering you away from the white houses?
I was quite angry about it, but I was persistent. I was determined to get what I wanted, the same as anybody else.
Quite angry sounds like an understatement.
We managed. We did okay.
But black families who couldn't own those nicer homes have not been able to build the same wealth over time. Many Americans, me included, are only just now coming to terms with how big a role our federal government had in enforcing discrimination. The question now is, what are we going to do about it?
The one thing that I'm struggling with, and this is as somebody whose family came through here,